1960s liberal was inherently unlikely, even at the time. More was... Now, how can I explain this? I think some people have been surprised at my picture of More, which I myself think is not an unsympathetic one. But people have asked me, you know, was he really such a bloody-minded heretic hunter? Yes, he was. You may say that he was working within the values of his time, but Thomas More, as Chancellor, burned heretics. He waged a sort of personal terror in the evangelical community in the City of London, imprisoning people arbitrarily, shutting them up till their health broke, till their business was ruined, himself working out who was a heretic and who was not. He was a driven man. His writings show that beneath his humour and playfulness, there's a streak of severity, of intolerance, of misogyny, which I won't say it was unique to him, but you do not necessarily find it in men of his time. So, The Saint in the Stained Glass Window shatters with only a little tap. That tap comes from disinterested enquiry. And I then had to try to rebuild More, bearing in mind that he was a wonderful propagandist for himself. Cromwell was a very different creature. He left very scant personal records. He never spoke about himself. He was not anecdotal, and he never tried to justify or explain anything he did. So we've got two complete opposites here. I have, of course, not, because of when my book starts, this is the older Thomas More. This is not the shining young humanist who was a great friend of European intellectuals. People in Europe were still struggling to maintain an image of More that they had in their heads. His great friend Erasmus, who'd been his friend for many years, asserted that Thomas More had not, in fact, burned any heretics. And when it was shown to Erasmus that this was not the case, their correspondence ceases, their long friendship pushed beyond the frontier here. So I am looking at the older More, and bear that in mind, that it can't be balanced because of that factor. I do think my portrait's fair.
And there are many contrasts. I mean, one you alluded to there, More as a misogynist compared to Cromwell, the paterfamilias to his adopted family. And Cromwell's fondness for his children obviously makes him more sympathetic character, and was slightly out of place in 16th century England, where their reputation for not particularly liking their children, you write about.
Well, in some ways things were shifting, because children of well-off and aristocratic households, it was a huge change if you were a girl, because it was becoming fashionable to educate young women. As Princess Mary was educated, and a generation down, Elizabeth and Lady Jane Grey, Thomas More educated his daughters, and I have supposed that Thomas Cromwell would do the same, because given his record as a humanist, there's no reason why he wouldn't. The English did have a particular reputation for harshness to their children. And what people in Europe couldn't understand was, why did the English send their children away and put them in other households from the age of about 7 or so? Because they didn't do this elsewhere. Actually, the English said, no, it's not because we can't be doing with them under our feet. It's because we love them too much. And we could never be harsh with them, and they'd never learn anything from us. So we send them away to other households where they're dealt with more dispassionately. So it's a good question who you believe.
You feel that Wolf Hall was the book that you wanted to write or were born to write. Clearly you couldn't fit it all into Wolf Hall. Can you say when you realised that there would be a sequel?
It was really as I began to work on the character of Thomas More, and I began to realise things about his relations with Thomas Cromwell, and realise that they were far more complex and ambivalent than I had imagined, or history usually paints them. And I realised that the death of Thomas More was in many ways a personal crisis for Cromwell. And I realised that the project was making its own shape. We were coming towards the death of More, and I was going to lose its emotional force, and I was going to let the reader down, in a sense, if I simply cleaned my axe blade and moved on to the next victim. It simply couldn't be done. I wanted, as it were, to play out that story for its full historical and emotional impact. And that was why I decided that the book would end on the evening of More's execution. The new book is called The Mirror and the Light, and it picks up in the autumn of 1535, when the holiday makers are at Wolf Hall in Wiltshire. It will take Cromwell through his further rise and rise, and his abrupt fall in 1540.
Well, I think I speak for the whole room saying we can't wait to read that one too.
No, you can.
And thank Hilary for coming along and talking to us all about Wolf Hall.
Thank
you very much.